Right, welcome everyone. I see there's 8 attendees. I wish I could see your face, but um, you may have heard the housekeeping um, details that if you have questions, you can put them into the chat. So I definitely invite any questions and I hope to answer as many of them as possible. My name is Antonia Estela Perez. I use she, they, and we pronouns. Um, Great to see young ones involved. Next week, 11/11, I'm going to be 28. Um, so definitely young, but also feeling like I'm entering into further adulthood. So the discussion and presentation that I wanted to offer today was the intersection between herbalism, social justice, ecology, and basically the role that herbalism plays and food plays in social justice. In social justice. So for me, I, as I mentioned, I'm 28. I'm first generation born in New York City. My family is from Chile, and they were displaced to the States because of the dictatorship in Chile in the 70s. And so that has really influenced one, my perspective around US imperialism and the role that as my parents were activists in their youth and needing to leave their homelands because of violence, it was instilled in me to always consider that the work that I do is not only for myself, but is for my community and my people. Both on my mom and my dad's side, there are people who have always worked with plants for healing, land workers, teachers, healers, to seamstresses and barbers. And being first generation, one of the biggest questions that I held as a young person and feeling very alienated and out of place in a predominantly white school in New York City was where am I from? And so I was fortunate enough to be able to go back to my homeland in Chile and be with my family and get to know the plants there and be with my grandmother, who I always give so much credit to for having influenced my love and respect for plants. And so something that one of the deep values, aside from not only doing things for ourselves in the work that we do, is always remembering that Earth is our mother and that every action that we take has a repercussion, that our words, our prayers, and we need to be in such integrity with the words that we speak, because they manifest. So in that question of where am I from, knowing I'm not really from Chile, and I'm not really from New York. Even now I'm like, I feel a deep responsibility of being a part of this land that has nourished me throughout my life. These questions inspired me to deepen my curiosity of the plants around me and the histories of the original peoples of these lands. So from a very young age, I would find teachers, or teachers would find me, and we'd go on plant walks and learn about the plants growing in New York City or outside of the city. And as I was in this process of learning and realizing that what I saw, at one point was just green. Now everything had names. It wasn't just green. It was the oak tree, the sumac, the maple, being able to recognize these beings all throughout the seasons. The territory started speaking to me it started speaking to me. So that for me felt was such an important moment in my journey to recognize that, um, to deepen what my grandmother and my family had been teaching me of, one, the earth is alive, everything is alive, from this computer that we're using, everything is nature. The only thing that has happened is that because we as humans have become so disconnected from nature and from recognizing ourselves and seeing us as a reflection and micro and macrocosm of the earth and the universe, that we've been extracting from nature, and have created things that cannot go back to nature in the way that an apple core would, right? And so when we begin to see things as alive, we are able to honor them, feel their sentience, and there's a deeper value and respect that, um, that we feel, right? And so when we are able to feel that, we feel that respect, we're so much more conscientious of how we value and use resources. And so in this capitalist system, the idea and just of capitalist economics is that the earth is full of infinite resources and that it is meant to be extracted, right? Which is very different from the cosmologies that I've grown up with, which is, no, we need to, these resources are finite and they need to exist for 7 generations to come. And again, back to how all of this has influenced my journey, and growing up in New York City, and in a city that's so highly developed and so many layers of concrete poured over the earth, the springs, that just inspired me to stay in the city and to think, well, actually there's a history on this land, and it's a history of abundance, of natural abundance, which is one of the reasons for why New York City is the place that it is, why it was one of the first settlements on Turtle Island, and why it's, this kind of the seat of this of capitalism. And so having then gone to school, college, and learning more about plants and herbalism, it felt so important to me to bring that back to my community in New York City, where there's such a separation of what we think, oh, in New York City, that's urban and nature exists outside of the city. But really, as mentioned before, everything is nature. And these glass buildings, the concrete is layered over bones, is layered over blood and peoples. And there's such deep history there that when we begin to peel those layers out, you recognize just the, well, one, you recognize that there's soil underneath, and that the plants and the stories of the ancestors of these lands continue to speak through and grow through the cracks in the concrete. So the work that I've been doing for the past, 6-7 years has been around youth education, and not only youth, really intergenerational education, in teaching people or facilitating the opening of learning about plants within an urban context. So bringing people on walks along the Mexicantuck River, which is known as the Hudson River, but Mexicantuck means the river that flows both ways, and it's an estuary, meaning that it has an opening out into the ocean. And so going on these walks with people, for example, in my community in Washington Heights, that's predominantly Dominican, inviting the space for people to, one, learn about who are all these beings that are around us, not just see this as a vacant and thrown away space, but actually when we begin to see all of these beings that are alive and seeing that there's potential to grow, even though we think of the city as, oh, nothing can grow there, but who are the plants that are resilient enough to grow that are offering medicine. And while in this moment, because we're not in a full apocalypse, even though many times, and in the situation that we're in economics, but also in terms of climate chaos, we, especially in urban settings, are so vulnerable, and we're not, the way that I see is, are not prepared for the challenges, especially just already seeing the amount of food insecurity that exists in urban settings, but also just the ways in which we have been, as BIPOC people, been robbed of our ancestral skills of how to survive. Meaning, how do we make fire from friction? How do we build shelter? How do we purify water? How do we know the medicinal plants that are growing around us? And that has been part of one of the reasons that my family is alive, indigenous peoples are alive, why people stolen from Africa and brought to Turtle Island were able to survive, because of their deep connection to earth, to land, to plants, and being able to recognize plants here that were in the same families of the plants from their homelands, bringing the seeds that were culturally relevant and that were nutritious, and planting their gardens. There's actually this amazing book called In the Shadow of Slavery, Africa's Botanical Legacy in the Atlantic World, which I highly recommend everyone to read. And so in doing these walks along the river or in New York City, people begin to recognize and see these plants that perhaps it's marshmallow, plants that are good for our lungs, or mullein also for our lungs, Queen Anne's lace for reproductive system, mulberries that are supporting to nourish our blood, that are also the leaves helping to nourish our lungs. And you start seeing the abundance even within this urban landscape where we're told that nature doesn't exist. And when we learn to recognize them and then learn to make medicines with these plants, we begin to, I believe, grow our autonomy and the skill sets that we need in order to be able to survive, even in the midst of capitalism, where if we're to need medicine, we go to the pharmacy or CVS, or we get a prescription to buy what we need. But what are the plants and the foods that we can utilize for prevention, so that our immune systems, our nervous system is strong in the face of all the adversity that we may face day to day. So this work I found is so powerful with all age groups, but especially young people. I've found that even so can be so small of just spending time in a garden, like playing through soil and starting to see worms and seeing life in that soil, or growing soil. I worked for a few years at a youth organization called the Brotherhood Sister Soul. And when I arrived there, the soil was full of glass and plastic. And I was like, I can't teach young people to love the earth if there's glass in the soil and they may be subjected to getting cut. So for the first few months, we were just sifting through all of the soil, bringing in compost. And that next year of growing the soil, putting down sheet mulching with cardboard, putting down cover crops, the soil now had mycelium in it. It had worms. It had the roly-polies. And you could just see the ways that the young people were interacting. That space was so different than before. They saw life. They were able to confront the fears around touching a worm and seeing that the worm wouldn't bite them, to then seeing that, we could plant this calendula seed and seeing that calendula seed grow, to then harvesting those flowers and infusing them in a carrier oil, say olive oil, observing as it infused for a month, and then making an herbal balm. So I actually have an example right here. So it's when you infuse plants in oil, usually about a month, and then you strain the oil from the plant material, and you combine that with beeswax. And so that, even just an example like that, opens up young people's minds and awareness um, in such a beautiful way, because they see how they can create something that is coming directly from nature, from that seed that they planted, and also learning to save those seeds so that they can continue to have those plants season after season. So I'm seeing that there's, oh yeah, the book title is In the Shadow of Slavery, Africa's Botanical Legacy in the Atlantic World. All right. Are there any questions so far or comments? There it is. Something I see too when I hold space in urban settings, and why I shifted before that word from teaching to facilitating and opening up space, is inviting that question. And I invite it today of to everyone that's here, thinking someone in your family who has used plants for healing, and maybe just taking a moment to think about maybe your grandmother, your aunt or uncle, or a story of some sort of remedy that was used, or what your mom, whoever parent, maybe it was a spice that was used in your kitchen cabinet, or something found at the grocery store when you had a sore throat. So taking a few breaths to reflect on what those remedies may have been, and who those peoples are. And if anything comes up, I'd love for you to share on the chat. And when I offer this exercise, usually lasts a little longer. People at first will say, "Oh, I don't have any connection to plants, and I don't know anyone in my family that is connected to plants." But then towards the end of our session, or throughout the session, people are remembering, "Oh, I remember my grandma would make, when I had a sore throat, would make me an onion and ginger tea with honey." Or I remember my mom would rub olive oil and garlic on my chest. And so it's so beautiful when these memories start surfacing, because people, without maybe even realizing in that moment, see, wow, I actually do have a connection to plants. I have an ancestral relationship with plants. And again, especially with BIPOC people, where we've been, and that has been part of the colonizers' agenda, is to remove us from land, displace us from land, take away our ability to heal ourselves with plants, because seeds are it's the most valuable currency, because that regenerates life. Knowing how to plants for medicine and for food, and food being medicine, literally is what allows us, gives us autonomy. And so in those moments that I've witnessed, that it's so beautiful, just when we're able to have that space to reflect, and to see that even if we believe that we don't have a relationship, when we begin to look far enough, we see that there is a relationship to land. So someone said I've started learning on my own as I've grown up to incorporate plants in my healing. I love elderberry, ginger, and turmeric. Yeah. So another thing that I've been doing over the past few years in my herbalism work is, as herbalism grows in popularity, um, which is very exciting, but we also need to be wary of, as something becomes more popular, it becomes commodified, and what is the impact that that will have on the plants. So a lot of my work actually involves planting these plants. All of the herbal medicine that I make is from plants that I've grown, or plants that friends on farms have grown, oftentimes that are considered to be weeds. And so back to what I was mentioning in the beginning, that it's not, what are our values, not only doing things for ourselves, how can I make this herbal medicine for myself, but being very aware of, how much do I actually need? How much does my community need? What are my community's needs for herbal medicine? And so then you're planting accordingly, you're harvesting accordingly. You're not over harvesting just because something is in its season and, oh, let me just harvest everything. Am I harvesting at the appropriate time of the year to ensure that that plant is going to have the opportunity to drop their seeds? That I'm not harvesting roots in the spring because that plant hasn't generated their seeds. So if I take that root in the spring, I'm killing the plant. I'm going to wait till the fall around this time to harvest roots because that plant has already dropped their seed. So that's part of the work in healing that land and being in relationship to land, which takes time. It takes patience. A lot of people ask me, like, I'm getting into herbalism, like, what books do you recommend? And I always just start recommending with a field guide. But spending time outside, I've had many teachers, but my greatest teachers have just been with the plants, being able to slow down and observe, and less is more. Doing nothing is oftentimes so much better than doing something, because in that space of just observing, and I do this work a lot with young people, is before we start, you know, putting a shovel in the earth or starting to build things, let's just observe what is happening right now. Not what we think we want to happen, but what is happening right now in this moment during the year. And having these exercises, sit spots, that you can do every day for just 5 minutes. Each person that's here today can begin to incorporate that, but just taking 5 minutes to notice what is outside your window. And that can be anywhere in an urban setting, seeing who are the people that are walking by, who are the beings. Maybe there's a squirrel or a muskrat or a deer, or a blue jay, and you start maybe seeing that blue jay every day, or you see how, if you're going there at different times during the day, maybe there are other birds that are in that same branch. So you begin to you're becoming a part of that landscape. And something that I really am striving towards is, how can, in the work that I do and in the communities that I'm involved with, and then and outward, how can we become keystone species? How can we be a species that is supporting in the abundance and regeneration of life, not only for ourselves, but for all of the life that is around us, for the deer, for the squirrels, for the bears. It's so funny, the difference, I think, in the way that, herbalists and like land stewarding versus horticulturalists, that often is just about aesthetic and what is deer proof, and, oh, these plants are eating, the deer are eating my plants, and like we're at war with the deer, which is a whole conversation. But thinking of, how can we not only be growing for ourselves, but also be growing for the life that is around us and whose homes we're actually on.
And Antonia,
Yeah.
I'd like to draw some attention to the questions in the
Yes.
questions and answer box. We've got a Courtney asking about some plants that you recommend to start with to build the immune system.
Thank you. So, to build the immune system, I would say starting with the nervous system. Um, Rest is so important to strengthen all of our bodily systems. Um, and you can even, I'm sure, in each of your experiences and moments where you're really grinding and you're not getting a lot of rest, you're so much more susceptible to getting sick. And then you just sleep for maybe it's 12 hours and you feel so much better. So I would start with rest and um, eating foods that are reflective of the seasons that you're in. So, for example, right now, in the Northeast being in fall, um, it's more roots, warm foods, things that are really nourishing, and introducing more fats into your diet to support your bones, to support your fat, to support your brain, and also to support your your whole nervous system and adrenals. So definitely, like, rest and your nervous system is so important in your immune system. And then I think about when your body's defenses may be down because you haven't rested, and what do you do there to kind of um, say, like, immune system start working is I mean, echinacea is the one that a lot of people go towards, but it's not spoken enough about that it should be used short term. So more, not necessarily as a preventative, but when you are sick for 2 weeks, acute, meaning for a small duration of time. Um, and then elderberry, which was mentioned, is a great one. Um, Mushrooms are great as well, reishi. And with mushrooms, just being really aware of getting them from people who are growing them um, ethically, and instead of wild harvesting, because depending on who that is can actually be creating a lot of damage in that ecosystem. Of course, there's garlic, um, ginger, but I tend to not look at systems of the body as separate. So I think then, all right, how is our digestive system doing? Because a great part of our immune system is actually in our digestive system. So, there's a train about to go by, so it might be a little loud. Um, how's our digestive system? So, introducing probiotic foods, sauerkraut, kimchi's, maybe yogurt if you do dairy, things that are bringing in that healthy bacteria into our body to support in digestion. Exercising, sweating, supporting our lymph to move all that stagnant energy. Our lymph is we have lymph nodes all around our body, um, which they're working as like little warriors to fight off any infections that might be coming in. So when we sweat, or even when we take a bath, or a foot bath, that's helping to work our lymph and helping us to sweat. So, are you working alongside with other young adults? We need that young energy as you have. Thank you for that. Actually, right now, the space that I'm in is I'm at Kite's Nest, which is a youth social justice youth organization in Hudson, New York, and I'm currently working with another young person around my age, and we're supporting young people in growing a youth-run composting business. So we meet every Monday, and it's 7 students. And due to COVID, it's a little smaller, and we meet outside, um, which has been so wonderful for me to be able to be working with young people in person again. Um, yeah, so I don't know if that answers, but yes, I work with other young adults, with the youth. And I think it definitely has its challenges for me as someone who looks young, um, and can a lot of times teens are like, are you our age? So I personally, working with teens is a challenge for me because, and it's an exciting challenge of how can I gain their respect, um, without positioning myself in a hierarchy to them, but kind of offering the space for all of us to be inspired and learning together. And so that for me as an educator is something with the teens, my own personal challenge. But I really enjoy learning with them, because I feel each time I'm with teens, I'm like, oh, I could have done this better, could have approached that in a different way. Um, yeah, it's definitely a triggering age for me, but it's always important to not take it personally, and to see where are they at in their own lives, and what might be um, triggering them to be speaking in a certain way, or in what ways do they need support. So cool. Any other questions? Um,
Well, I know you've given me a lot to think about, and to feel the confidence that these thoughts, these quick thoughts I have about connection and nature are validated, and that people are working on that and carrying that information forward from their ancestors. And so these little inklings we have of of memories or inspiration or thought are really those ancestors tapping us on the shoulder and reminding us that we are part of nature.
mhm.
And to know that people are working on this, and again, to have this connection point, to see, your email address or your Insta, or how we can connect with you, are ways that really grow this community. And yeah, you mentioned capitalism, and you mentioned these systems, the colonizer systems that have really become more predominant, and so I know it takes a little bit for me to break through that shell. And so although there may not be some questions right now, I know for a fact you're sparking amazing thoughts, and the potential for action within all those who hear the truths that you're saying. And um and and yeah, I just know that for me, I would love to talk to you so much, and I just don't know what the exact questions are. And so that over time those questions will evolve, and they may not be answered by you, but by our community that we see around us, by our ancestors that we talk to, or listen to, or see in the nature that we're observing. And so you're doing amazing things, and I just wanted to say that for me the questions are hard to put words to, but knowing that you're there and that people are on this track really gives me confidence to develop those thoughts and to ask those questions as they evolve.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that's so true of, even in just these kind of 45 minutes that we have. Um, just to spark these thoughts, and that sometimes the person who sparks them, like, we might not be able to directly ask them questions, but I will offer my email and ways to get in touch. But I think I love what you were saying of, maybe we'll receive that through our ancestors or through that observation. And I think that's really true. um, the way that I am continuously working on viewing time is not linearly, even though that's so hard, because even as we are are in the process of decolonizing, we have, I believe, most of us or all of us have grown up in capitalism, and so we have so much work to do to undo these concepts of time, or concepts around money and worth and rest. And there's so much harm that has been done upon us unconsciously, or that we are carrying in our bodies from our ancestors. And so we might not receive the prayers that we're asking for in that moment, or those questions that we're holding, but sometimes it will happen right away. And other times it might be 2 years later and you're like, oh, like that's why this thing happened, or oh, now I see. And so something I'm really also, as the seasons are shifting, just really focusing on being as present as I can to my breath. And when I wake up in the morning, um, and when I go to sleep at night, not looking at my phone, um, and just really being with my body, and just feeling like, oh, where am I feeling pain in my body? How does my body want to move? What does my spirit need? And I don't think it can be stated enough, like that we need space to rest. We need to make boundaries with technology, especially in during this pandemic, where we have increased our time on and reliance on technology. um, but that while it's an amazing tool, it's also literally draining us. If you, for me, when I spend too much time on the phone, my hand starts tingling. To remember that where we're actually going to get inspiration and significance and um, feel abundant is not by scrolling through Instagram comparing ourselves to other people, but is to go outside and look at the sun, look at the soil, look at the plants, and remember that that's where we come from, that is where the truth lies. um and so even if we're asking like, oh, I don't have any living person that is that I that can support me with this ancestral work, tuning into your dreams is, that's where you will receive so much information. And then being outside, being with the plants, doing that patient observation. And I'd love to hear if anyone does do that for say 30 days, like please email me and tell me how that experience was for you, because I assure you you're going to learn so much. And it's okay if you don't know the plant's name. That's only, it's like a person. I always tell people when we're doing plant walks, that just like with a person, you might know their name, but you don't know everything about them. It's a journey in being in relationship with that person where you get to know, where you get to see their um, the subtleties and their depths. And it's the same thing with a plant. The more time that you're able to spend with a plant, um, you're going to understand their actions, their constituents, not only like the superficial aspect of the plant, like, oh, that plant is red and the petals are red and that's a rose, right? But oh, what's the rose's story? What is the people's, the socio-cultural, political story of these plants? And that's a whole nother class that I love to do, of like plants migration, because these plants, the plants have a people's story as well. And I think we can spend the rest of our lives just learning about the stories of these plants and the different ways that, as they migrated, cultures use plants. And like uh, another thing that I spend a lot of my time doing is running my organization called Urban Cura, which I'll write here. Um, and this is an educational learning space where we offer knowledge shares. I teach some, and other people who are passionate about herbs, or foods that tell story of these plants. We've had the past few months, ranging from also history classes, like we had a class called "We've Been Here: Black Existence in New York City." That was all about learning about Black existence in New York City, from the very early starts of the settlement of New York, learning about the origins of the police in New York City. We recently had a knowledge share on tortillas, maíz, and learning about how to make tortillas, but also the cultural significance of maíz, specifically in Mexico. So we have many different knowledge shares, but what the thread between all of them is learning about their story, especially with cash crops. Say like coffee, where we may be drinking that every day, but there's a very complicated history with plants like sugar and cacao and coffee that really require so much respect and honoring to heal the wounds of these plants. So great. Does anyone have questions? I think we have 5 minutes.
Yeah, there is a question in the box, and we're about to get your contact information on the slide, so people can connect with you for further questions. But somebody asked about a vitamin D
Vitamin
deficiency.
D.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about vitamin D. I know just generally spending more time in the sun, but also that's a really good question. I'm going to keep that as a note. Yeah, not sure. I don't want to say something that is incorrect. So
No, that's beautiful, because you've I think with our field guides, understanding native plants, understanding what type of language we can use to find these answers to in our local community, I think is a good next step. And
yeah,
yeah,
and
not
actually, if you're interested in understanding more about the constituents in plants, you can search. Say, I saw St. John's wort. You can write St. John's wort materia medica, and usually the search results that you're gonna get are gonna be very are gonna be abundant with like what the medicinal properties are of those plants. So,
awesome.
any other questions?
Well, I'm very much looking forward to following you on Facebook and Instagram, and super excited to have your email for when these questions do materialize. I'm glad to be sharing that with the audience, and to have so many people here listening to the wisdom that you are making sure gets passed along, and it doesn't die, and it doesn't get quieted, and it doesn't get over, that this wisdom continues, and that the significance of herbalism and autonomy are phrases that we use more often, and so thank you for bringing this to the surface. And yeah, we'll open it up for any last questions, and otherwise we'll look forward to taking this knowledge and living with it, and seeing where it takes us.
Beautiful. Yeah, yeah, if anyone else has questions, but I definitely invite you to check out the Urban Cura website for the upcoming knowledge shares. There's not much right now, but if you are interested in being on the email list, I'm happy to put you on so that you can stay updated, especially if you're not on social media. Sweet.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, we'll be closing this out, and looking forward to seeing how this action turns and how its action materializes in our community.
Great. And someone just offered that if you want to see what minerals you might be deficient in, that you can take a micronutrient test.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
all right. Bye.